Hello, hello. I've been told my title is a bit clickbaity, so sorry if you came for the excitement. I hope it's going to be exciting. I wanted to talk about two completely different things, and the only umbrella I found to cover them was that they are exciting and compiler flags, so that's what we have. So for context, I work on kernel security at Google, a different team from Case, but I work on the production servers, blah, blah, blah. So I wanted to talk about SELSAN, also known as selective sanitization, and what I like to call profile-guided sanitization. I think it's a cool idea, so I wanted to share it with you. And then on a completely different topic, I want to talk about heap isolation and how it can help defend against some memory safety exploitation techniques. So let's start with SELSAN. So what is the idea here? I assume you all know about sanitizers. Sanitizers can catch bugs. They can stop bugs from happening or being exploited, which is great. But sometimes they come with a performance cost, which some people might consider prohibitive. So the idea is, what if we only apply sanitizers to the functions that get rarely called? That's kind of the main idea, really. And so yeah, if you collect some sort of profile for your binary, or for example for the kernel, you can apply some sanitizers, like for example UBs and bounds, only to the called paths, and you get a large coverage for a small portion of the cost, which is nice. It's a step up in the right direction, at least. And I have some sort of intuition, which I can't really prove, but I'm going to state it anyway, which is that the cold code, so the code that doesn't get called, sorry for my accent, a lot, is probably less maintained, so it's probably also more bug-ridden and has probably more vulnerabilities. But I can't prove it, so yeah. And also, I don't want to take credits for work I have not done myself. So the things I'm going to present today, I've worked on deploying them at Google, but I've not developed them per se, so I want to credit the authors. So in this case, for example, Vitaly, also from Google, worked on all the LLVM plumbing, so congrats to him. Anyway, so how does that work? There are basically two flags, which I call SELSAN. This is the first one, lower-allow-check-percentile-cutoff-hot. With a simple name. You can you can set a cutoff to your FDO profile, and this will distinguish between the hot code in your FDO profile and the cold code in your FDO profile. And the way you can take advantage of this is through a compiler built-in, this built-in allow runtime check, which at compile time evaluates to 1 or 0, depending on whether the place where you call it is hot or not in your profile. And for example, UBs and bounds already take advantage of that built-in, and it can optimize away all the bound checks from hot code, which you would rather not have, if you decide so. And so, yeah, the nice thing is that it integrates with your existing FDO collection pipeline. So if you already do PGO, for example, some sort of profile-guided optimization, maybe you already have some sort of pipeline where you build the kernel once, you run it with some workload, hopefully that is very representative of your production, and then you finish your build with that profile. So you can just reuse all of that, and it will magically work and apply SELSAN. But on the other hand, it's the same issue as with any FDO payload, is that if the workload you use for your FDO collection is not very representative of production, then maybe you will still instrument hot code that you would rather not instrument. So you can actually complement this solution with another flag, simpler this time, fsanitize-ignorelist. And this flag takes a file, and this file can describe files or functions in your code base that you would like to sanitize or not. And so it's an ignore list. But for example, you can express things like ignore everything, so do not sanitize anything, except the block directory. And if you have this rule, for example, you will only apply array bounds to your block directory. And so you can, for example, leave out certain pieces of your kernel which you consider performance critical, like the scheduler or networking or whatever. And this gives you also extra confidence if you add it. Like the two flags will mask one other. Yeah, you can be confident you will not, by mistake, accidentally start sanitizing some hot path. So yes, that's basically what I had to share with SELSAN. One more thing I can share is there's no real plumbing in kconfig, but you can provide them with KC flags if you like. It's rather simple stuff. That's all I had to say around SELSAN. And now you can just context switch entirely, a completely different topic. I'm going to talk about heap isolation. So before I talk about heap isolation, I want to give a little bit of context on heap exploitation. So when we look at how attackers exploit kernel vulnerabilities, we find that the vast majority of the time they take advantage of memory safety issues in the heap, which comes up all the time. What those vulnerabilities give them typically is some very small corruption. So they can corrupt some field in a structure that's on the heap, and that's about it. So what I want to do is to escalate this small corruption into a stronger primitive that lets them do stronger things, and usually they have a chain of stronger and stronger primitives that eventually give them maybe an arbitrary write or arbitrary code execution in the kernel or stuff like that. Anyway, the insight is they have some small corruption, and they will try to use it to corrupt some more powerful structures and get a stronger primitive. How do they do that? They use a technique called heap feng shui. And so if you know feng shui, it's about placing things nicely in your room or in your heap. So what attackers do is they cause a lot of k-mallocs or k-frees in certain patterns to lay out the heap memory in such a way that is favorable to their exploitation technique. To be more specific, I'll give you an example. So assume you have a use after free vulnerability in an object. So you have an object that is allocated somewhere, you have a dangling pointer to it, you free it, you still have a dangling pointer, so you can still access that freed object, and you can still write there. And let's say you can write at offset 5. Now what attackers are going to try to do is they're going to try to allocate something in that same location with some juicy, interesting pointer at offset 5, such that they can corrupt that pointer and get something more powerful. Anyway, that's the general idea. It always works sort of like that, or mostly works sort of like that. And the insight here, the idea is if we separate objects on the heap based on certain properties of the allocation, for example, certain properties of the type, we can make heap feng shui significantly harder. So again, I'm not going to take credit for work I've not done myself. Marco did all the heavy lifting here. Marco implementing all the LLVM plumbing, and he even sent an RFC to the list to make use of that in the kernel. I'm just going to present his work and share the excitement, of course. So what Marco built is this concept of allocation token, and it's implemented in Clang, starting from Clang 22. Essentially what it does is Clang becomes aware of those C allocation idioms. For example, if you do kmalloc size of struct blah, Clang is able to introspect this expression. The first argument to kmalloc is an expression that evaluates at compile time to 10. It's the size of struct blah. But Clang is now smart enough to introspect this expression and figure out, oh, what you're trying to do is allocate a struct blah. And therefore, it can do introspection on type, and it can infer certain properties of the type, and make certain decisions based on that. So that's kind of the plumbing that is in Clang. And the way it's exposed is through this built-in. So again, a new compiler built-in. Built-in infer alloc token. You give it an expression, like size of struct blah, and it will tell you an allocation token, which is a type hash. So there are different mechanisms for hashing a type, and currently there's only one that is implemented, which is this type hash pointer split. So it has a number of buckets. By default, it's 16, and essentially will guarantee you that the objects that contain pointers will be in certain buckets, and the objects that do not contain pointers will be in the other buckets. So that's the guarantee that Clang will give you, given that isolation scheme. But the plumbing is general enough that it could be extended with better type isolation schemes. And for example, Apple worked on, let's say, stronger proposal for their kernel XNU. It's called kmalloc type, where they have, let's say, smarter or more powerful type hash. yeah, so that's the plumbing that is in Clang, and what goes with it is the plumbing for the kernel.
Sorry.
Yeah.
How does the compiler identify the allocating functions? By attributes?
So if I remember correctly, kmalloc is implemented as a macro, or in dispatchet it becomes implemented as a macro, and therefore it expands to a call that is like the inner function of kmalloc, size of struct blah, and built-in infer alloc token size of struct blah. And the compiler will, when it evaluates that second argument, the built-in infer alloc token size of struct blah, will replace that statically with the allocation token for the type.
Okay, so basically kmalloc expands to something that calls malloc.
Yeah, basically, yeah.
Okay.
There's this indirection layer.
Oh, sorry.
Ah, yeah.
Should be missing that.
Yeah, okay.
I tried to repeat the question, but it was basically how is this implemented? That was the question, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, how does the kernel can take advantage of this? Marco also sent a proposal to the list, this RFC for config-typed kmalloc caches. It sort of builds on an existing config random kmalloc caches parallel series. So it's very similar and very simple patch. And so it extends slab, which is the allocator that implements kmalloc k3. And it extends slab to do what I just said, like figure out the allocation token for a type and use it to isolate objects in different slab caches. These slab caches are what I've been calling buckets. I find buckets is a better name, but it's called cache. And so yeah, right now it's hard-coded to 16 caches. I think this is to mirror the existing random kmalloc caches series, but it doesn't have to be. It can be made configured. And obviously, the more buckets you add, the more caches you add, the more secure, the more isolated your objects will be, but also the less performant, because they will be more spread in memory, maybe have a less efficient memory usage. So. And now a big word of warning. As much as I absolutely love this config, and I can't wait to enable it once it's all reviewed and landed, and I can't wait to deploy it. Unfortunately, it is not a solution to anything until we have slab virtual, which is a mitigation against cross-cache attack, which is kind of a variant of what I've been talking about, where attackers take advantage of the fact that these slab caches, they can be freed entirely, given back to the page allocator, and then be reused for a different cache. So even if we had very strong type isolation right now, attackers could still take advantage of cross-cache to do exploitation anyway. So we need slab virtual, but doesn't remove any merit to this config, and still I can't wait to have it enabled. So that's kind of what I had. I hope I shared some excitement with you. I hope you're all very excited. I see Case is already very excited. So
I am. I think another thing you can say on that last slide is slab virtual needs this to be a complete solution as well.
yeah, maybe I don't see it. Can you expand on it?
So with slab virtual, you get the larger cross-cache defenses, but you can still do inter-cache confusion. So we actually need both.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But it's not complete without having both. So there has been some debate like, oh, well, it's not perfect. You need both simultaneously for it to work. It's like, no, just get one, and then you get the other. Order doesn't matter. We just need to get to it.
Yeah,
so,
certainly. Yeah.
It's good. No, this is exciting.
I had a question about the selective sanitization stuff. You don't have to go to the slides. Currently, how you explained it, it's kind of like all or nothing. You set a threshold, and I wonder if you guys have thought about more of a stochastic approach where something's likelihood of being instrumented is directly correlated to how hot it is or how cold it is, the inverse. So if something's cold, it's more likely to be instrumented. If something's hot, you get instrumentation sometimes. I don't know how you would do that. Maybe right before you call it, you make a you have like two instances of it. One's instrumented and one isn't. And then you flip a coin and choose which one to go to, something like that.
I see.
So that you still get instrumentation on hot things occasionally, 1% of the time? I don't know.
So I think there is, so it's even a different stochastic take on this. There is another compiler flag, which I didn't use, which randomly samples your sites and randomly decides at compile time whether they get sanitized or not. But not. It seems that what you're saying is at runtime you decide whether you will randomly decide at runtime whether to call the sanitize or not function.
Right, and
I think this is, for example, what kfence does is kind of like that. I think it's great, but addresses a different need from the one I have in mind. Like kfence, in my opinion, is fantastic for finding bugs from your production fleet. It's amazing. But because the probability of hitting kfence is so low, it's unlikely to prevent an attacker from doing anything useful. Whereas with celsan, you can make the somewhat wacky, weak case that if an attacker finds a vulnerability in your code, it's sanitized away. Yeah, that's just, yeah.
That's it.
So how much it got improved by this cell pair with a normal sanitizer?
I mean, yeah, I don't really have a number that I can give you in terms of like code coverage. Depends what is your cutoff, of course. Yeah, you have to believe me. It's it's a wide coverage, but obviously less than if you enable the full sanitizer.
Another question is you talk about the representative of this PGO. So have you considered using something called alt-fdo?
Yeah, so I believe the way this plumbing is done in LLVM, I have no idea how this works, is incompatible with auto-FDO.
Depends on how you implement this. I don't know how they implement this. Because PGO counters, they drop only available in the instrumentation path. After instrumentation, we drop the counter.
Yeah. Also, one concern we had around this idea of using the production data is that the production contains the kernel of yesterday. And so if you're doing a kernel upgrade, maybe the functions have changed. So the function name, like a function that was super hot is going to get renamed, and then you will consider it to be called in the new
This
profile.
won't happen for PGO, right? PGO always use the...
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's a trade-off, yeah. Nothing else? Thank you.